So I made this doweling jig, and the idea behind it is similar to the idea of one of these doweling jigs where you have two pins on opposing corners, and by centering the work so that it's touching these two pins, it naturally centers itself with the center hole here, except you need to keep twisting this as you drill the hole, which means you can't drill with two hands, which if you're having a lot of holes is quite tiring. So I designed this one to lock itself to the work, and the way it does this is you have these two pins which are analogous to the two pins on the other one, and then this swivels and locks itself onto the piece of wood, and then we have a ratchet mechanism here, and that's what torques this piece here, and it works, but it doesn't work very well in that, well, the first thing I need is a stronger spring, and the second is this is quite unstable, and it's not going to hold its place if the drill tries to stray from the direction in which you're drilling. And so I'm going to create a second iteration of this with a few design improvements, and I'll show you what that looks like right now. So on the new one, instead of having two separate surfaces, one for the pins that move and another for the pins that are stationary, I'm going to put both of these surfaces in plane with one another by creating a circular recess in the outer piece, inside which is going to go this other part that has the pins that lock on. So the router decided to get away from me, but we still have another side, so let's try that again. And then I went through the same process to cut out the circle that's going to be inset within the other one. For the last circular piece, it was a bit too small to safely do it on the table saw, so I used a jig I made for the bandsaw to accomplish the same thing. I should have done this before as well, cutting out this notch, but since I didn't, I improvised two blocks to hold it on the table saw sled. And now on to drilling the holes for the dowel pins. But before we do that, it's time for Riddle of the Week. What acronym did the hippie Buddhist say that got him expelled from Buddhism school? Tell me in the comments below. So the main components for our jig are basically done. We have these two parts which you've seen me make, and then the handle here has this interesting geometry with these three grooves. I'll explain what this groove in the middle is in just a moment, but these two grooves on the outside are for the part of the handle that's going to go on top and pull the spring back. And there are going to be these little strips that intermesh with the maple like so, except the problem with this is that if I just glue these strips on here, any glue residue that is left over in that little slot is not something that I'm going to be able to remove very easily. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put a very thin strip of tape along this rail here, and then I'll cut it flush with the surface of the rail, and then I'll glue it on, and then I'll peel the tape off 2 minutes into the glue up or something. This little ring is for keeping the two parts we've been working on together. Here I'm gluing it in, but I shortly had to take it off again, so I'd recommend you just use screws. The maximum thickness of material that you can drill into using this jig is determined by the space between these two pins. Now, it's important that we know how much these pins are going to move, namely how much the platform is going to move, because it's what dictates how far back we're going to have to push this handle to tension the entire mechanism. And to find the range of movement, all we have to do is place a ruler between the two outer pins the way we would if we were going to drill into it. Now, at rest, the jig should have both of these pins be perpendicular and equidistant from this ruler here. And what that means is that the range of movement that it's going to undergo is from this position all the way to this position, which means that it's less than 90 degrees. So if we look at the other side here, and we take the circumference of this circle, and we divide it by 4, since 90 times 4 is 360, we get the distance that this handle will have to travel backwards if we're drilling into the thinnest thing possible before it starts to tension the entire mechanism. Quick piece of advice if you do this yourself, make sure to attach the string to the spring first and not to the nail over here. So the main mechanism is complete, and you'll notice that I put a red rubber band here to return it to its original position, and I also made this into a little bit more of a pulley shape so that this string doesn't get caught underneath it. And now we need to put the ratcheting mechanism, and the way that's going to work is I have this lever arm here with an articulation, or a nail for an articulation, and then we take this spring, and I found this spring in the inside of a lighter when I was taking the igniter out, and there's a tiny little hole right on the shoulder there, and the spring, one of the ends goes in there, and then you'll notice that we have this little tiny bit of nail sticking out here, and the other end of the spring, the end that I'm holding right now, goes on top of that nail like so, and then we put in the part that's actually going to ride against the teeth of the ratchet, and now that stays put. After that, I cut the nail to length and then spent the better part of 5 minutes trying to get a glob of solder on there to keep the lever arm from coming out. And as you've probably noticed, I also put some heat shrink tubing on the dowel pins to give it more grip on the work you're drilling into. Okay, so after an undisclosed number of hours, it's finally finished. It works pretty well. This lever is a little bit difficult to press when it's under tension. So what I would do differently is instead of having these teeth have a sloped side and a vertical side, I would make the vertical side also slightly sloped to make it easier to press this when it's all the way back here. This pulley ended up working better than I expected. It does guide the string properly. And I'm also going to replace this rubber band with an actual spring because this will eventually break. And yeah, the springs haven't gotten here yet. I bought them online. So it does hold itself pretty well to the work, and to my surprise, you can actually operate it with one hand, almost, and it just about holds the weight of my drill. If I put it more towards the end, it does fall, but that's a lot more than the other one could do, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.